Hi guys, this is Elizabeth from Alexandria's Private Tuition, and today I thought I'd go through just a quick revision on the power and conflict poetry. I know the exam is tomorrow, so I really hope that this helps somebody. So, power and conflict. When we think about power and conflict, it's really important that we think about the words individually. Okay? So, the cluster of poems is not just about control or dominance, it's about who has a voice, who is silenced, and how individuals respond to the pressures of that power and that conflict. So, throughout the cluster of poems, we see abuse of power where leaders and systems or institutions control others through fear, violence, or oppression. We also see internal power where characters battle with guilt, mortality, or emotional resilience. We also see this idea of powerlessness where individuals are voiceless or erased by society, war, or politics. Similar, conflict isn't always physical. It can also be internal. So this idea like um, emotional trauma, guilt, or moral conflict. And it can also be external in terms of like war, violence, and political control. So both types of conflict deeply impact identity. They force the speaker to question who they are, what they value, and how they see the world around them. Basically, kind of like questioning their place within society. So, I've clustered the poems together. So, if we think about power of humans, institutions, and oppression, in the poems I've got listed below, we see the power of human authority is presented as destructive, temporary, and often abusive. So this really kind of like shines a negative light on humanity. Shelley exposes how rulers like Ozymandias are forgotten despite their arrogance. Blake presents London as a city trapped by social and political chains, criticizing those in power for exploiting the vulnerable. So when he talks about runs in blood down palace walls and how the hapless soldier cries, he's actually talking about the political um, aspects of power. Then we've got Browning in My Last Duchess reveals how toxic masculinity reduces women to possessions, while in Agard, Checking Out My History, challenges the colonial control of education, demanding that suppressed identities should be reclaimed. So all in all, the power of humans in this cluster of poems isn't necessarily presented in a positive way. It's almost presented in a really kind of like arrogant and selfish way in an attempt to gain power by any means necessary. So across the poem, power is fragile, dangerous, and often used to oppress others rather than uplift them. Then we've got the power of nature and the natural world. So in the poems, it shows how nature holds power more than humans ever could. And I really think that in the particular poems that I'm going to look at in a minute, it really shows that we as humans underestimate the power of nature. We only see this one side of nature where it rains, it falls, it's beautiful. But in these poems, it almost kind of like reminds us of how powerful, how ominous, how authoritative nature actually is. In one Wordsworth, sorry, the prelude, nature is presented as a spiritual force, overwhelming the speaker with awe and fear. If you go onto my actual page, I've actually pinned an in-depth video on the prelude. It's one of my favorite poems, but I've pinned it so that it goes into a lot more detail there. We see it as overwhelming the speaker because he's in awe of nature. In Heaney, Storm on the Island, builds tension through the personification of nature as an invisible attacker. So this kind of attacker that we fear. We can't see, we can't actually fight against it, but it's the kind of like mental trauma of that. And it reminds us that power is both unpredictable and relentless. And Darkest Tissues explores the fragility of humans' creation, suggesting that nature, time, and human connection hold greater significance than material structures. So, together, these poems reveal nature as external, unstoppable, and deeply humbling, reminding humanity that nature was there at the beginning and will be there at the end. Then we've got war, conflict, and violence. So the poems in this group challenge the glorification of war, shows the brutality, fear, and the psychological destruction that war causes. So Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade celebrates the bravery but hints at the futility of following orders without question. So it's really that idea of getting people to really think about, why am I doing what I'm doing? So in war, like, why are we following these orders? And it led to those brave men losing their lives. Then we've got Owen's exposure, presents war as pointless suffering, where weather becomes the real enemy. Then we've got Bayonet Charge, which captures the panic and the instinct of a soldier reduced to human dynamite. Again, that is a very powerful poem that shows kind of like the inner conflict that war causes. And then Armitage Remains. Again, I've pinned a video that goes into a lot more detail with regards to this poem, but the poem reveals the lasting trauma that soldiers face while at war. Okay, the PTSD, that sort of stuff. Like I said, check the video that's pinned. It should be helpful. And then we've got in War Photographer, Duffy questions society's detachment from a distant war. So she's basically like questioning how individuals who, like a war photographer who sees the war unfolding, how they're actually suffer with PTSD and how they're kind of forced to kind of like remove themselves from the job that they're doing. Then we've got Garland's Kamikaze, which explores the shame and personal loss tied to the patriotic duty. Again, that is another powerful poem that focuses on how war affects us as humans. So together, these poems reject the romanticized view of war, the glorified images of war, like how you're this brave soldier, but instead it exposes the lasting psychological impact of war. Okay? Then we've got Memory, Identity, and Personal Conflict. So these poems show how identity and memory shape human experience. So in Ware's poem, Poppies, it captures a mother's emotional conflict, blurring memory and reality as she mourns the loss of her son to war. And again, that's a beautiful poem that almost kind of like blurs the lines of time, like this idea that war is everlasting and there's no time limit to the suffering that we have as a result of war. In The Emigre, it presents a speaker who clings to this idealized homeland, showing how memory can protect identity even when reality changes it. And again, you've got Agard in Checking Out My History, which confronts the colonial expectations while using a dialect and highlighting historical figures in order to kind of like reclaim identity. Now, these poems remind us of who we are, and it's often shaped by what we can remember about ourselves, what we've lost, and what we choose to reclaim. And it really kind of shows us how war, internal conflict, and that sort of stuff can affect our identity. So, what you need to remember. And this really links to the bigger ideas. It really links to the writer's intentions, the poet's intentions, and really to get you in that band 6 of conceptual knowledge. Power and conflict isn't just about the poems, it's about people's lives, politics, and the lasting impact of conflict in human lives. So you need to view these poems as a message to the reader. It's there to teach us about something, to warn us about some sort of aspect of life. Every poem in this cluster forces you to think about who holds power, who loses it, and what conflict does to an individual's identity. Conflict just doesn't happen on battlefields. It happens in relationships, in memories, and within us. When you revise, don't stop at spotting techniques and quotes. Think about the deeper meaning. Ask yourself, what is the poet really trying to say about the human experience when it comes to power and conflict? What message are they trying to leave behind for us to learn from? Okay, so thank you so much for watching this. I really hope that this helps you. The best of luck for your exams tomorrow. And if you have any questions, please drop it in the chat below. Bye.